Was the moon landing real? Do lizard people walk among us? Did the CIA run a covert mind control program on US citizens? Conspiracy theories, they can be imaginative, even fun. They can also be dangerous. Every now and then, one may even turn out to be true. I'm Dareen Abughaida. This is the Doha Debates podcast.
But they're so satisfying because everything ties together in a way that just doesn't happen in real life.
Active propagation of conspiracy theory and hate speech against Rohingya in 2017 led to genocide.
You know, we may not have lizard brains, but we definitely have monkey brains. And I don't know what we're going to do, in 5 years.
We want free speech. We want to know what people are really thinking.
Today's debate: is there anything worthwhile in conspiracy theories? I'd like to welcome our guests. Alex Berenson is a former New York Times reporter and writer of the Substack newsletter Unreported Truths. Nuriyanti Jolly is the co-author of Misguided Democracy in Malaysia and Indonesia, Digital Propaganda in Southeast Asia. Andrea Kitta is a professor of folklore at East Carolina University. And Heather Berlin is an associate clinical professor of psychiatry and neuroscience at the Icahn School of Medicine at Mount Sinai. Welcome to you all. So the first question to the table. Andrea, start us off. Do conspiracy theories hold any value?
So I think they're really important to look at because they actually tell us a lot about the temperature of what's happening in the world. So they tell us a little bit about what people are afraid of, what they're concerned about, kind of what's going on, and what their real fears are. So I think they do have some value, although they definitely do have some problems as well.
Alex?
Yeah, they absolutely have value because sometimes they're true and sometimes they point people in the direction of things that are true. I would say the most obvious one in the last few years that everyone knows about was the argument over whether or not COVID was natural and, leapt to humans from bats via, raccoon dog or whatever animal supposedly was the intermediary, or whether it much more likely leaked, or I should say, whether it leaked from a lab in Wuhan, China. And, in 2020, when people dared to raise that possibility, they were very loudly called conspiracy theorists. And I think today, most serious people agree that COVID almost surely came out of that lab. Now, we can argue about what happened and whether it was a mistake or I personally think it probably was a mistake, but the idea that this virus came out of a bat in this natural form, even though no one's been able to find any precursor that looks anything like it, I think that's an example of a case where the quote unquote conspiracy theorists were 100% right. And we need to acknowledge that, and we need to acknowledge that conspiracy theories have value.
Nuriyanti?
For me,
is your nodding along acknowledgement or what's going on?
For me, the way I see it, conspiracy theories, instead of having social values, it has instrumental values for platforms, for political actors that benefit from informational chaos. We're talking about how platforms such as meta platforms, WhatsApp, Facebook, Instagram benefit from this heavy engagement on the platform. So the more engagement that they have on the platform, the more advertising revenue they can generate. So that's one. And secondly, we're talking about political actors, especially in authoritarian states or weak democracies. They can use conspiracy theories to maintain power and to gain power. So that's how I see it.
Heather?
So, I think that they have value in the sense that they help us understand a bit more about the human brain and about psychology. Regardless of whether they're true or not. So, our brains are wired for survival, not for truth. And while, the outcome could vary, meaning, let's say the, conspiracy theory that, the coronavirus started in a lab ends up to be true. That's because enough evidence then builds up to suggest that. I think the problems come in when there's conspiracy theory and the overwhelming evidence is in the opposite direction, but people consistently hold on to those beliefs. And that's based on our wiring. It's based on confirmation bias and pattern detection and, fear. When we have inconsistency or uncertainty, we seek for comfort in explanations. And so I think we're wired to want to believe in some underlying foundational explanation and meaning for things. And so it's important to give us some sort of solace and comfort. I think the problems come in when people adhere to these ideas because of maybe group identity and all the overwhelming evidence is false, yet they continue to adhere to them, like some people, who are anti-vax for various reasons, where that can actually have real world harmful impacts. So I think it's a kind of mixed bag.
So, I mean, I agree with that point because especially during COVID-19, where I'm from Malaysia. So there's a lot of issue with anti-vax movement where I'm from. And a lot of time, this anti-vax narrative kind of associated with religious values, right? So a lot of Malaysian, if you know Malaysian, is a Muslim majority country. And one of the key conspiracy theories among anti-vax believers, right, they were saying there's porcine DNA in the vaccine and a lot of anti-halal, non-halal components in vaccine. So this conspiracy theories kind of spread on Facebook across different social media platforms, and because people have no idea about what's going on during COVID-19, that conspiracy theory helped them to feel better about themselves and about the ideology. But the issue is, it causes more harm in a way that even if it provides comfort to people that, for them, psychologically, like you said, human beings are wired to survive, right? It's a part of our nature. But also at the same time, it doesn't justify the what we call it, the impact, the negative impact of having that emotional or what we call it cognitive comfort towards what's happening out in the real world. See here, for example, in Malaysia, because of that religious pork DNA vaccine, that led to what we call it vaccine hesitancy among religious groups, right? And again, go back to my earlier point, platform benefit from it. That we have a lot of Facebook groups on Facebook and also on WhatsApp, right? That are still still exist until today. So some are removed, right, because people reported it, but some still, remain. Why exactly that, right? So we go back to because people actively engage on it, and then platform benefit from it.
Did the Malaysian government try to crack down?
Yes. The Malaysian government through Ministry of what we call it Ministry of Health, and also they work with the Majlis Fatwa, right, to clarify this is religious misinformation, right? This is religious and also medical misinformation, and it can cause public health issue in the country still because people want to believe what they want to believe, right? It's motivated reasoning. So we have a psychologist here with us. Motivated reasoning, even whatever, contrasting ideas with evidence provided by people. But if you insist on believing in that, you refuse, you refuse that truth because you, have strong belief in your initial idea.
Because it's not really logical. I mean, it's not when we say cognitive and logical, it's really emotionally based. Right. It's, when we feel threat detection, the amygdala lights up in our brain and we are seeking comfort. And so logic and reason don't really help change belief systems. Right. So if it comes to something, say, like a public health issue like vaccines, if you explain to them all the rationale behind it, it's not about that. It's about, group identity and feeling threat. And so you have to actually reach people more on that emotional level or calm their fears or, give them a kind of different identity. Because, that's why there's initiations into different groups. Like sometimes you have to do something so extreme, like adhere to a really crazy belief, like the earth is flat, right? But there are people who still believe the
Right.
earth is flat, right?
Mhm.
And their group identity might be so strong that that for survival, it made more sense to identify with a group rather than be alone. So there are certain people that are more vulnerable to certain conspiracy theories. Again, I think they have value in that people should be able to think outside the box and have an alternative view. I think that's great, in terms of conspiracy theories. But then once enough evidence has been collected, either that can, support it, that's great. That means that, okay, they were ahead of their time thinkers. But when there's enough evidence to say that it is not true and they continue to adhere to it, that's when all these psychological mechanisms come in. Confirmation bias, you only take in the information that supports your belief and not the counter information. So, but in order to change beliefs, we really have to, it's not about just giving them the information. It's really at these deeper, more emotional levels.
So I would say, since I'm sort of been put in the position here of defending conspiracy theory, I think, to the other panelists, I would say in the last 10 years, I think you'd probably agree with me that beliefs that you would argue are generally conspiratorial or sort of anti-liberal have gained attraction. To take example that we're just seeing, it seems that the world, a lot of the world, has moved away from efforts to battle climate change. Right, what I would call decarbonization. Decarbonization may not be dead, but it is certainly hurting. And my question to you would be, why do you think that is? All these nice liberal beliefs, why have they suddenly lost traction? Is it Elon Musk's fault? Because I don't think it is. I think that the world has actually falsified some of these beliefs, and so I think that what people on the left don't see is that that's the problem that they're having in this debate. It's not that the platforms are trying to move to the right. Elon certainly believes in free speech,
Right.
Which again does promote sometimes an ugly style of argument. But I would say, my question to you is, why has, despite the efforts of the great and the good and George Soros and Bill Gates, why has this idea that we need to decarbonize the West, seemingly run aground? And you can't just tell me, well, you can tell me whatever you like, but it doesn't seem to me it's just a conspiracy theory winning.
Okay,
So
who wants to take that
I was
on?
going to
Heather, go
say,
ahead. Yeah.
actually, one of the things I wanted to interrupt with is we're really getting into this debate about it being this or that. And there's a lot in between.
So what's missing?
And so we're missing everybody that's in between, because I think when we think of conspiracy theories, we think you're either a believer or you're not. And there's a lot of people in between. And I refer to them as conspiracy thinkers. They're not necessarily theorists. They're not contributing to it, but they're reading it. And there's so much in between there. And there are liberal conspiracy theories. So there are less of them, yes, definitely, but there certainly are some. So I think when we start to divide, that doesn't really help us to come to any sort of conclusion about this. It just reinforces our own beliefs about people who believe in conspiracy theories or don't. So if we actually think of them more as a spectrum and think about where people are, and you're so right about algorithms and what people are getting into is these echo chambers, and then they don't really hear any dissenting belief. So they start to think that what they're hearing is, typical. So they don't hear the other beliefs outside of that. And it's true of not just being online, it's true of all social media, but it's also true of the news. I mean, depending on what news station you watch, that's what you're going to get. So all those people who are questioning, that are in between, that are saying, I'm a little bit nervous about COVID, or I'm a little bit nervous about vaccines. I've been studying the anti-vaccination movement for 25 years. There's so many people in between, but then they get sort of stuck with either choosing a side. And then it becomes almost like a part of your identity. It becomes that, like you were saying about, you get into this group. And I mean, I think as human beings, we want to be a part of a group. And conspiracy theorists, the people who are truly involved in the conspiracy theories, part of the reason they got involved in that is because they probably didn't have a good social base. And they found that online. They found other like-minded people. Maybe their friends and family weren't listening to them anymore. So they developed this whole other social base. And of course, there's social consequences for walking away from that. And there's also that social consequence of if you do decide to stop being a conspiracy theorist, you lose your group, right? You lose your people. But then you also have to maybe try to come back to your group. And there's always that fear of the I told you so's, right? There's that fear of coming back and saying that you're wrong. Nobody wants to say that. So there's so much social pressure involved in this as well. And I think about this a lot too, especially with vaccines and parents. The amount of social pressure that happens to parents and deciding whether or not they should vaccinate their children it's massive. And then, of course, what group then do you belong to? Because it is picking a side a lot of times. And there, I think that we forget about all those people in between that are kind of caught in the middle.
So when does a theory actually become conspiratorial? Meaning, what makes a conspiracy versus legitimate skepticism?
Well, that's a great question, because I think in a lot of ways we are a little bit hardwired for conspiracy. And I think that's actually not always a bad thing, right? There's this, if we walked around and just believed everything, if we didn't question things, being a little bit of a skeptic it's a good thing, right? Things happen to us in our lives. Partners cheat, friends do things to us. So there's it's a good thing for us to be a little bit suspicious. It's just when that turns into, a lifestyle, I guess, that it really becomes a problem. But it's so easy to get caught up in that with the algorithm, with the echo chamber. When you're isolated in that way and you're only hearing that information, of course, it all seems typical to you.
But there seems, I think the difference also is that with a conspiracy, like there's theoretically a whole underlying secret like network of people that are organizing things, and often and they're often government conspiracies, and the government is actually, when you get closer into it, it's not as organized to be able to pull off such a conspiracy theory that there's no leaks and nobody knows and everyone's coordinating. That's more illogical than not. But I agree with you in that it's not right or left. I mean, there's conspiracy theories on both ends of the spectrum. I think anybody goes to the extremes, and they becomes a group of almost like cult-like. And, we have in the United States, someone like Marjorie Taylor Greene, sort of descended from and then got ostracized, right? And that's what people fear. They fear that isolation. But to answer the question about the climate change, I think it's a larger issue in that people want, they want to survive. They want their immediate comfort. Thinking about something large like climate change and the future is very abstract to a lot of people. And so what do we want? We want our creature comforts. We want to be able to maybe, consume as much as we want and just don't worry about the trash and whatever. And so you're more likely to then adhere to these sort of, it's not a problem. It's not, because that's more comforting to your current immediate lifestyle. So I think a lot of people are still living very much in the here and now, and they're not thinking. It takes a lot of impulse control to say, I'm going to do this for the greater good. And because that's hard and difficult, I think people have kind of slid back with climate change. But maybe
maybe people are well aware that in the last 100 years, using carbon and oil has improved living standards worldwide. There are far fewer deaths from climate change or from climate events than there were 100 years ago. That's actually true. It's something that most people on the left, I think, don't actually know, but it is true. And they don't want to be lectured by people who are lecturing them from the backs of private jets. And so if you're in the UK and you're paying 36 cents a kilowatt hour for your electricity, you suddenly wake up and say, why am I doing this? Who is benefiting from this aside from, a few financiers who are putting in tax subsidized windmills and Greta Thunberg, who, feels good about herself. So what I'm saying to you is that on some of the most important issues where people get tagged as conspiracy theorists, they're being perfectly logical and reasonable. Now, I'm not going to defend, there's a lot of conspiracy theories I'm not interested in defending, but I think on these really core, large issues, the left just doesn't see its own blinders. And, decarbonization, the absolute cratering of it in the last 5 years, despite what is really a worldwide consensus among the elites from 2010 through 2020 that this was the issue of our time and needed to be faced. I mean, and immigration, by the way, that's another one where sort of elite feelings about how nice it is to have a new Vietnamese restaurant, on the Lower East Side are running smack. And that's a reference to the United States. So, I don't know how it will land with a worldwide audience, but elite preferences for widespread immigration into the U.S. and Europe are running into, average people who don't necessarily feel that it's the best thing for them. And it's not because of conspiracy theory. And it's not because there's somebody on the right, certainly, who's pulling any threads. It's people making their own decisions.
I want to add on to that. I remember the question was, what are the contributing factors that leading towards to people are moving backwards in terms of seeing a natural gas, oil and gas decarbonation efforts, right? I think because I research information ecosystem, and I would say that two contributing factors to it is one is that, again, I believe platforms play a role in this because, again, we go back to the point where
you really think Meta cares whether its oil comes from natural or its electricity comes from natural gas or solar power? Because I don't think Meta cares about that.
They don't care about the content; they care about the engagement, on the platform, right? So it can be problematic content, like we're talking about hate speech, we're talking about all various problematic content, including climate change related content. Platform, they care about it's a business model. They care about making profit. So whatever content that generates a lot of engagement, good or bad, they care for those, right? So that's one of the contributing factors. And secondly, I believe that companies or interested parties or agencies that benefit from this narrative, they understand that platform because we use social media a lot every day on a daily basis. I keep on asking my student, in class, what's the first thing that you do today in the morning? Instagram, TikTok. So a conversation happens on social media, right? And they understand that. And a lot of public discourse happen on social media. And companies, they use that to help propagate the ideas, whatever that idea that is. And it can also include that. And also, Dareen, I want to answer that question. What's the differences between,
conspiracy and legitimate skepticism?
It's evidence. For me, it's evidence, right? Legitimate skepticism often, what we call it, use evidence to help them understand what's going on. But conspiracy theory often move away from that and just focus on their personal belief. So here, one of the key differences, I believe, would be the evidence component to it, right? So people, say, for example, journalists, right? Journalists who are trying to understand something, a case, say, for example, we have to collect a lot of evidence to inform what we call a report about that issue, right? So that is critical, what we call it, thinking, right? So skepticism, evidence informs skepticism, but conspiracy theory, it cares more about the emotional, the cognitive
But
component.
there's often a kernel of truth in these conspiracy theories. That's the problem, right? They pick this kernel of truth, and there is some evidence, we didn't really land on the moon. And, look, we can make these images that look like you land on the moon. And so, there are certain... you can pick and choose bits and then you tie it together because our brains are meaning maker machines and they want to find patterns.
Right.
We're pattern detectors. And so I don't think it's not based on some sort of evidence. It's just that ultimately over time, when enough contradictory evidence accumulates, they're still clinging to their particular belief.
Would you say that selective evidence then, right? Selective evidence can create a misguided, what we call it, informed decisions. Decisions, right? So that's
narratives.
Narrative,
narrative.
Right. And a lot of time we cherry pick, human beings, right? We're human beings, we're emotional beings, and we like to be right all the time, right? So that's that's human beings. That's how we are wired. So that's why we cherry pick information that aligns with our belief, and that cherry picking can also include truth, right? But when we combine it together, right, that cherry-picked information doesn't mean it's going to create a whole holistic, what we call it, explanation to what's really happening.
Why do people buy into conspiracy theories?
I think there's really something satisfying about a conspiracy theory. Not only do they give that narrative component, we're human beings, we like stories, but they're so satisfying because everything ties together and in a way that just doesn't happen in real life. I mean, we don't get the kind of closure that we would like to have in our everyday lives. But in conspiracy theory, you get all of that. You get this closure. Everything has a reason behind it. Everything is organized. It all makes sense. And I think our lives aren't like that. And if we think about like going back to COVID, that's such a great example of us really filling in the gaps when we didn't have knowledge. And I think that's what we're doing a lot of times too with conspiracy theory, especially when it's something emergent, is that we're trying to create a narrative. And in the case of COVID, we're trying to create a way to protect ourselves. So we did that via narrative. We actually said, well, as long as I don't do what these people did, I'm safe. So if I don't go to that super spreader event, if I don't go to that wedding or that funeral or whatever it was, then I'm safe. But then that also meant that we didn't engage in the things that to make us human, right? We didn't go to that wedding. We didn't go to that funeral. All those things that give us joy or closure or any of the emotions we're used to expressing and feeling. So instead, we went for those conspiracy theories. And I think we always forget to in this, and this is actually something Heather can probably speak to a little bit better, is, things like anger, things like joy give us that little bit of like serotonin, all those good happy chemicals. Even anger gives us serotonin, right? Like we get that little like jolt of, this feels good, right? And it's simple, right? It's so simple. And that's why I think that people are so attracted to these things, is because they do just tie everything up in this neat little bow in a way that our lives just don't.
So the question was, why do people believe in conspiracy? I think there's different. So first of all, I think there's certain people that are much more vulnerable to believe in conspiracy theories, especially groups that have a lot of uncertainty, that don't have a strong sense of like self and identity. They're looking for group affiliation. Conspiracy theories gives us a narrative that gives us a sense of control. Group affiliation gives us dopamine, pleasure. When we start to form these concepts of in-group, out-group, and when there's something that goes counter to your sort of group or your belief system, the insular cortex gets activated. It's like almost like a feeling of disgust, the other. That's why there's all this anti-immigration. And in some sense, our brain evolved in this way to protect us. Like when you're pregnant, for example, you have a greater sense of disgust. Smells seem stronger. I mean, I remember being pregnant and because it makes sense. You want to protect this newborn from any contaminants, right? From like actual viruses and germs. And we've sort of our cognition, our evolved cortices have led us to then extrapolate to like other people are dangerous. They are. And that's what a lot of people who are promoting this anti-immigration, they speak of them as if they're carrying diseases. They're othering them. But we get pleasure from having this group affiliation, from having answers. Ambiguity doesn't feel good. I often say to my patients people with OCD, and there's like uncertainty. Did I lock the door? Did I not lock the door? I'm going to check. They want closure, right? They want that feeling of, okay, I know now. But I make them sit with the ambiguity and sit with the uncertainty and tolerate it. And I think that's where we can become more open. But it's hard for people. It doesn't come innately to us. So I think that there's certain things very satisfying about having an explanation. I mean, it's similar to religion, right? There's all these different religions out there, regardless of whatever one you might or might not think is true, whatever one it could be true or not true, the others are not true, right? So we want a belief system to, let's say, because of our fear of death or what happens after we die. And then we come up with these elaborate explanations. But like I said, certain people take actual evidence into consideration and can change their mind. But others who are more vulnerable in different ways psychologically are going to be less likely to take that evidence into account and to change their belief system.
I want to add on to that as
Sure.
well, like why people believe in conspiracy theory. And I think, like, Heather also can give a better explanation to this. But human beings, we are emotional beings and we like stories, right? So both of you, Andrea, as well, right? Right? We like stories. And a lot of time, emotional stories are more engaging and more interesting to listen to compared to truth, right? As a researcher of misinformation, right? MIT studies found that false information, including conspiracy theory that's very emotionally engaging, travels a lot faster, 6 times faster than facts. Facts are boring, right? So, like, okay, right? But conspiracy theory, we're talking about lizard people. We're talking about, like, pork DNA in vaccine. It's more interesting. It's more like, and then you kind of want to learn more about it. Is it true, right? And then you find information that matches with your belief, and then you engage with it. And couple that with, like, say, for example, low media literacy or low literacy, like in general, right? You're easily influenced by that information. Plus, with systemically the platform architecture, if you spend a lot of time on social media, it fits you with information that they think, like platform things that you like. So all these different factors kind of like contribute to that and led to the spread of conspiracy theory. And that's why we like it more, right?
I don't think anybody actually
Go on, Alex,
answered-
weigh in.
I don't think anybody actually answered my question as to why in the last 10 years, what I would think the other panelists think of as conspiracy theories have gained traction, and why public policy around, quote unquote, good public policy, elite set public policy has been so violently is probably the wrong word, but so soundly rejected. And I know it's funny, like I keep trying to talk about sort of specific events as opposed to this broad idea of conspiracy and conspiracy theory, because I think it's more interesting to face these issues one by one. But we haven't mentioned, none of us have mentioned the biggest conspiracy theory in the U.S. in the last couple of years, one that certainly cuts across party lines and cuts outside the U.S., which is, of course, the Epstein files, and what's in them and what he was really doing, and what it says about sort of our elite architecture. And so, that has become the object of much discussion. Obviously,
I mean,
in the
here's the
US,
thing. I think
and
you would need several podcasts, right,
To talk about
to
Epstein.
talk about not only Epstein but the different conspiracy theories that are out there, right?
Right, but
just back to your original question, who wants to take on Alex's question?
But I do think we should talk about Epstein and what it means. And we don't have to talk about the details, but why it has resonated so much. And I would say,
well, that is it. That is a
say
question.
It's
Why-
resonated because
right.
it, to me anyway, it ties into this broader skepticism of elite behavior and whether there is an inner circle. That doesn't have to be a bunch of people meeting in the woods or whatever, but a bunch of people looking out for each other, whether it's, the big banks during the 2008 financial crisis or deciding to shut the world during COVID and not really thinking about what the effects might be on school children in Nigeria or in the U.S. for that matter. And so, but we're gonna protect this sort of group of older people in the U.S.
Yeah, I don't know what the specific question is if we were to boil it down, but I would argue that it's not two things. It's not about a particular conspiracy theory, because we can argue the facts are not about those particular things. Pizzagate, Epstein files, Tylenol causes autism, all these things. And some things are true, some things are not true. But I think it's about a systemic issue with human psychology, that we are caveman brains in a modern world, and we're still operating on these old operating systems that cause us to be vulnerable to these belief systems. Whatever the specifics that happen at Epstein, we're interested in it. Part of what you said is curiosity. That, interesting, dopamine. Oh, that's so. Now it's amplified by technology, by social media, and all the algorithms that have. So I don't know, to your point that you said, how come people now are believing in conspiracy theories more? I don't know that it's increased. It might have just been amplified because of the technology that we have now.
I guess what I would say is I'm not sure. I agree with you. I'm not sure people are believing conspiracy theories more. I think the left and sort of the elite left, whether that's in academia, whether it's in journalism, and these are worlds I know pretty well, very quickly says that public policy changes that it does not like and rejection of its policies by sort of average people as measured in votes are due to conspiracy theories on the right, rather than thinking about whether or not there might be really good reasons for people to reject those policies. And that's why I'm sort of trying to talk specifics.
I would argue that it happens on both sides of the fence. I don't think it's a left or right issue. I do think when you're talking about conspiracy theories, the idea is that people, the powers that be, the man or whatever you want to call it, have some sort of organized, system that's in place that's working against us, the non-people in power.
Right.
Whether it's right or left, I think you can see it from both sides, but it's really maybe you want to call it the elites or the people who are controlling things, the government. But whether
I guess what I'm saying is, do you see any truth in that?
Do I see any truth?
In that broad conception that there are people broadly in power who are not motivated by the good of the average citizen in democracy.
I mean, of course there are. Of course there are. But there are also people that are motivated by the good. I think there's both. I mean, there's a certain kind of psychology that wants power and wants to get there for different reasons, and everybody has their own, incentives. So yes, of course. But whether the systems can be that organized to carry out such a conspiracy thing, that is so well coordinated and nobody finds out about it. And I find that I'm becoming more skeptical.
Of course.
I want to bring that conversation to my part of the world, Southeast Asia, and how exactly people in power use conspiracy theory to, influence policy, right? To influence policy and to maintain status quo. So this is one of the most famous cases, right, about Rohingya refugee in Myanmar, right? So one of the dominant conspiracy theory about Rohingya Muslims in Myanmar is that the Rohingyas are trying to Islamize Buddhist Myanmar, Buddhist Southeast Asia. So the government and the military related, actors, they use Facebook to propagate this conspiracy theory. And what happened is that active propagation of conspiracy theory and hate speech against Rohingya in 2017 led to genocide of the Rohingya community. You can see that issue in Malaysia, that we have a lot of refugees and many other surrounding countries as well from Myanmar. And immediately after that is that they ban social media, right? And this is policy, right? It's a policy to start policy that they use as a weapon to do this horrendous thing to the Rohingya people, right? And based on the idea that if we let them live here, then they're gonna take over, right? They're gonna take over. So again, the policy with banning social media to suppress anybody that question that narrative that the government have about the Rohingya was silenced through policy, that social media ban. That also happened in other countries too, like in Indonesia, for example, in 2019. This involving a protest in Papua and West Papua, where Papua students, they were harassed in Surabaya by authorities, racist abuse by authorities, and they were filming it, right? They want to share it with the world. Right, they wanted to share with the world, journalists coming from all over the world trying to cover that. And the government at the time were saying that foreign actors contribute to this. There's some hidden elites are contribute to this, to this issue, protests in Papua. What happened next is that they start to throttle social media, WhatsApps, Facebook, and all social media on August 21st. And the next day they ban it. They banned social media altogether, like in West Papua. So journalists affected, right? People like you and I affected. They could not share what happened to them. So that's a policy that Indonesia repeatedly used a few times.
So does that mean we need social media then?
Yeah, we surely need social media, right? But that's not what happened in Indonesia, say, for example, and many other countries. It's that overreach of policy. We need to protect democracy. We need to protect, like, people's voices, right? And a lot of time it can be criticism towards the government, and not all government are the same. So it's something that we need to remember. Not all government are the same, and some government use information, information to gain power, right? And use policy also to maintain power. So that's like, some of the two cases that I can share with you, like from my part of the world.
It's so important too to talk about when conspiracy theory gets taken with power.
Right.
Because we think of conspiracy theory, at least in the past, as being this thing that was, some guy in a tinfoil hat in his mom's basement. This is the idea, right? Which is, of course, a stereotype. But now that we are talking about governments using conspiracy theory, we're certainly seeing this in the U.S. right now as well. There's, the CDC now is questioning vaccination and the autism link, which all of medical science says there's no link. But now, because it's on the White House website, because it's on the CDC, this actually gives a lot of weight then to those conspiracy theories. And the more we talk about power and conspiracy theory, I think it becomes really problematic. Exactly in the way you're talking about is when the government can use a conspiracy theory sort of against its own people or silence them when they're actually expressing what's actually happening, that's really problematic in a lot of different ways. So I think that's one of the changes as well. It's not just that social media and the internet have, entered in the conversation in the past 10 years. It's also that governments have entered in, and that people that have either, social power or they have, governmental power, using this and putting their weight behind it. Even when a celebrity puts their weight behind these things, that's still problematic. So that's also what's happening if we look at sort of the history of conspiracy theory in different places. Is, it used to be that conspiracy theories were this sort of fringe idea, but now they're being brought up and giving, that credence of either authority of some sort, or, even people maybe that shouldn't have authority. Right. If we get into some of the debates over things like, celebrity or those kind of people. So I think that's part of what's contributing to all of this as well.
But I think it's multiple layers, right?
Yeah.
It's conspiracy theory upon conspiracy theory, right? So it's like you have the governments are using conspiracy. That's a conspiracy theory, right? Like, are governments manipulating and using the social media to propagate conspiracy theories for their own desires, right?
That's well-established research, at least where I'm from.
As what?
It's well-established research, yeah.
So, but the only difference between it, it starts out as a conspiracy theory, but some of them become true. And then we just say, oh, that's fact now, right? And others become ridiculous. We think they're ridiculous because all the facts are against them. So that's where the outcome, but they all kind of start from the same place of, I think alternatively. I think there's something secret going on. If it turns out to be true, great. If not, and you continue to believe in it, then, what's wrong with you? But the thing about social media is it's a double-edged sword, right? Like you were saying, we want free speech. We want to know what people are really thinking, right? I think suppressing freedom of speech is bad. But that also means what comes with that is you're going to have the amplification of dangerous ideas and that actually harm people in the real world. And, I think it was in Samoa where, RFK went and, used this problem where they had a mistake with these measles vaccines and 2 small children died. And then he used that to propagate. He went to the government there and said, look, these measles vaccines are killing everybody, whatever. So they put into policy not to use it anymore. There was a huge outbreak. All these children died. And eventually the president came back and said, I was wrong, actually. And they reinstated the vaccines and it's ended the epidemic. But false information can have real world deadly consequences. That being said, suppression of free speech can be just as dangerous. So it's like, where is the balance between how much regulation we want to put into social media to prevent, dangerous ideas from spreading, but also allowing freedom of speech because we want to know what people are thinking. I want to know who in this room, thinks the lizard people or whatever are thinking about. Like, that's important information for me to know about you. But it's like, where do we draw the line? And that's just an open question.
Alex, when do you think conspiracy theories can be dangerous?
I mean, look, they can clearly be dangerous. They can be dangerous when they are directed at like an individual group. Or when they lead people to, I would say, take, medical action that is contrary to their own interests. But I mean, I'm very much a free speech absolutist, but even I have, some limits. I think, for example, that, personally libeling people, you should be able to sue for that. I think that, for example, the conspiracy theory around the Sandy Hook shootings that was a school shooting in the United States more than a decade ago now, where, a guy named Alex Jones, who was a podcaster, repeatedly, you can argue over the details of what he did, but essentially allowed many guests to claim that these might be crisis actors, that they weren't real. I mean, I think that's a disgusting thing to do. And obviously psychologically harmful to the parents of the children who were really killed at Sandy Hook. And Alex Jones, has never been held accountable in the United States for that. I mean, there's an effort to continue to hold him accountable. And I think that that's right. But that's a civil case. I think in general, people should not be criminally prosecuted for speech under, most circumstances, almost any circumstance. And I think, frankly, these questions are really only going to get more complicated because AI now, allows people to generate information and voices and video that are increasingly indistinguishable from reality. So, we may not have lizard brains, but we definitely have monkey brains. And I don't know what we're going to do, in 5 years or 3 years, when there's very, very realistic, or 1 year, when there's very, very realistic looking video showing, a murder or, something happening in Ukraine that didn't happen. I mean, we've been dependent for the last 50 or 100 years on essentially being able to believe in the voices that we hear on the radio or the images that we see on television or now on our phones or screens. And I think we're moving out of that world. I mean, I don't have a good answer for this. I think your business is going to get even more interesting.
I mean, I think it's problematic because now, our brains, we don't have a one-to-one correspondence with reality, right? So we take in the information and we construct a reality, and we all see the world in a slightly different way through our own sort of perceptive lens. And your brain is just an information processing machine. It doesn't know truth from fiction. I mean, this is one of the problems. I mean, I'm working on a book now about, like, can we ever really get to truth given all of our cognitive biases and the way our brain processes information? Now you're going to add into that just false information, but the brain is seeing it as real. And, whether you see an actual sunset or imagine a sunset, you're activating the same kind of visual areas of the brain. So we're going to be completely fooled by these images. I mean, this is the reality. And so I don't know if there's policies that can be put in place that you have to tag images as AI or, if that's even possible. But we don't really have any guardrails against this. And the way our brain operates is like what it sees, it constructs its own inner reality based on this information coming in. And the more realistic these things become, the more difficult it's going to be. And I don't know what the solution is, but I do think it's problematic. Yeah.
I want to add on to your point about like what exactly do we have in place when it comes to AI generated like content for platforms. We can see that they aware that this is an issue, right? Again, because the content generated by AI platforms are becoming more realistic, right? It's hard, even for myself as a teacher that teach like, hey, you should like discern like falsehood, out of the information that you see online. I myself fall victim to AI generated content. It's hard, like you said, like, when we see it's, when it looks like it's authentic, then we don't really question it, not until if we find contrasting information, right? And platform aware of this. This is an issue. And some platforms start to work on it. But the question is, what we observe as information scholars is that they're taking too long to work on it. Why exactly, right? Again, we go back to that point. It's a money-making business, right? So if you put, like, say, for example, Google start to introduce like watermarking, right? And labeling. If you use a lot of AI and they put it on Instagram, immediately, automatically, it label it as AI-generated content. But it's not as robust. It's not as, like, for TikTok specifically also. TikTok gives you option. If you use AI, it gives you option to label it or not to label it, right? Or not to label it. So it's up to you. But again, it's a real issue. In 1 year, in 2 years, in 3 years, it's becoming a lot more chaotic. So what do we do about it, right? I think one of the things that we need to do is to make platform more accountable. Platform is kind of like pretty much not as we do not put them what we call it under scrutiny as much, right? Right now they are using this ambiguity of conspiracy theory, like, to help them justify their role as what we call it as a referee of truth and referee of democracy, which means that, hey, we're not sure if this information is right or not, right? So we should allow it on our platform, right? We should allow it on our platform. And I'm doing this for the sake of like democracy and protecting free speech. But also at the same time, there's issue with it, right? Especially for people that are directly involved in the conspiracy. I mean, people affected by that conspiracy, it has real life impact. So what do we do about it? I feel one of the best way that we can do is make them accountable. Like government has to introduce some sort of a policy, but that should not be on government itself. It should be also involving people like you, scholars, experts to advise. If we leave it to the government, we know that not all governments are the same. Some governments are crazy, right? They use this to suppress freedom of expression. So what do? We have to collaboratively work on a policy and make sure that that policy will not suppress people's voices. And also at the same time, make platform more accountable, right? Because platform now pretty much, still making a lot of money out of it, right? And even the recent case with Meta, right? With the impact that they have, Instagram has on teens, right? Based on the latest leak, they pretty much like don't care about what the societal impact of the platform has on the people, on these young teens. So it's,
I think another thing too, we really have to watch our algorithms too, because there's a very short period between I'm watching a men's fitness video to I'm being fed white supremacy narratives. It's a very short, it's like 3 videos away, and that's pretty much it. And so I think that's another thing. I don't understand it entirely, but it's wild to see how fast it happens. Even if you just Google something, all of a sudden you get different things being fed to you. Yeah. And I think there's something that could be happening there too with algorithms and watching how they're used. Right. Because I think the original intent, I don't necessarily think this is a whole big conspiracy theory and it's all nefarious, but I think the original intent was to give you things that you like, right? That's like, oh, you like cute animal videos, here's some more, that kind of a thing. But then unfortunately, it has moved in these different ways where it's like, oh, okay, you like this. Well, how about we start sneaking this content in, and some of it is surprising how fast that happens.
If you read so Jonathan Haidt's book Anxious Generation, which is a lot about this, but the for young girls, there's a mental health crisis, right? And for young girls who, let's say they suddenly stop posting as many pictures of themselves, they'll start advertising them like makeup stuff and this and that, right? Like it's capitalism, and they're capitalizing on people's anxieties and vulnerabilities. I think one of the problems, and it has to do with algorithms for sure, and they have to take responsibility for the algorithm. I mean, there's a bunch of cases now with AI, stuff like the large language models and ChatGPT and those things where there's been suicides, right? Because of these ways that they're structured, and they really need to start working on it. The problem is that what I see potentially happening is that because there's different governments in different countries, but these things cross borders, right? So like with CRISPR is, genetic modification, of our DNA. And there are laws against genetically modified babies. There'd be laws against that research here in the U.S., but other countries can do that research, say China, and then that's going to cross borders, right? So let's say we put stuff in place in the U.S. to, help modify what's happening. Other countries don't. You can actually have warfare, psychological warfare between countries. You can infect a country with, by infecting its people with what's happening in these algorithms. So I just don't know, it would have to be something kind of like climate change that's globally coordinated for it to actually have an effect.
I think we've seen with climate change that citizens of individual states are not that interested in having their policies set by international organizations, and to some extent that was true of COVID too. The one fact that I may be the only, well, you may know this, but the U.S. military actually ran an information warfare campaign against Chinese-made COVID vaccines in Southeast Asia and the Philippines. Yes. Yeah, right.
Yeah,
the line between conspiracy theory and propaganda campaign or national interest campaign can be thin indeed. But I think I keep waiting for somebody, to say, well, here's a conspiracy theory that, people on the left tend to believe more than people on the right. And I'm not hearing that. And so I think these are all real problems and real issues, but I do want to keep saying, I think that this is an excuse. Essentially liberal elites, the neoliberal elite, have made for the rejection of its policies broadly in the last 10 years. It started with Brexit and Trump's election. Brexit was 2015, or Brexit I guess was also 2016. Both Brexit and the initial election of Trump were in 2016, and it's only accelerated since then. And I do think there are some people on the left and in the middle who are trying to figure out what to do. And in the United States, anywhere, there's a big debate, it seems to me, on the left as to whether the left should go further left and sort of be almost quasi-socialist. And there was a mayor of New York who was elected in November, promising semi-socialist, policies. And then there's also this other group of people on the left in the U.S. who want to go back to Bill Clinton and Barack Obama and sort of a more neoliberal. I don't know what the answer is, but I do think that, I think that to some extent this is all an excuse for the rejection of policy. And I'm probably the only person at the table who thinks that, but I haven't heard anybody make a case that it isn't.
Okay, what is the question, though? The question was...
The question is, this debate is sort of positing that people are more, I guess, affected by conspiracy theory than they have been. Maybe I have that wrong, but that we've seen a rise of conspiracy theory.
Right.
And I'm not sure that is really true. What we have seen is a rejection of certain neoliberal policies, climate change, immigration in the U.S., trans care. And I don't think that it's necessarily that there's some conspiracy on the right to do that or that somebody's pushing any buttons. I think that people have seen these policies up close and lived them for a while and don't like them. And so that has, and, with COVID, here's the example that I probably know the best in the last 5 years. The COVID lockdowns were really they were very much a top-down policy. They were spread internationally. There was really no support in public policy for them. In fact, for 20 years, the United States had said in the event of a moderate respiratory virus epidemic, which is what COVID was, the best thing to do is essentially manage it medically and go on with life. And in a matter of weeks, in March of 2020, that was all.
I'm sorry. I'm just going to disagree with you saying that it's moderate. I work at Mount Sinai Hospital.
It's not moderate.
There was deaths. There was tents outside in Central Park.
Yeah, and those tents, they were empty. Those tents were empty.
There was
the hospital ships were empty.
I was in New York.
I was in New York too.
Working in hospitals at Mount Sinai. I can't say that in the early stages of the pandemic that it was moderate. There were deaths.
Yeah, of course there were deaths.
A lot of deaths. And I think that there was I think some of the mitigation efforts really did make a difference. Whether it went too far is another question, but at a time there was a lot of uncertainty. And so
every
people
school
were being,
in the United States should have been open by September
were being
2020.
extra safe.
Every lockdown should have been
not.
ended by September
You
2020.
can say what you want in retrospect.
I said it at the time. That's why everyone hated me.
But just because things could work out in a way that you predict, they could also work out in another way. It could have led to many, many more deaths. So I think there was, out of abundance of caution, that a lot of these things took place. Whether you said they went on too long, whatever, I'm not going to debate that, and I'm not going to debate it.
You should debate it, though. We're here to debate.
Well, I don't think it has to do with.
You don't like what the answer is.
No, I don't think it has to do with conspiracy theory. I mean, we could have a debate on COVID. I don't think it has to do with conspiracy theory. I don't think there was a conspiracy by the government. I think they were doing the best with what information. I work with some of those scientists. I know, people working with Fauci, people on the COVID transition team to the Trump administration. I know those people, and I know a bit of what was going on, and people were trying their best based on the science to make policy that was going to save as many lives as possible.
If we're going to have a real discussion about this, but there was definitely an understanding in the media that locking down was very bad for Trump. It was bad for the economy, and it would help Biden get elected. That was an understanding at the top of the media. It was basically spoken aloud. And so that was an actual conspiracy.
Government, Trump administration was at the forefront of creating the vaccine.
Trump administration was forced, yes, absolutely.
And so, but I'm not, the point is, I'm not going to get into specifics of it. You're asking the question of, I don't think everybody on the right or on the left, thinks that there's all these conspiracies going on. I think that was the statement you originally made.
Okay, let me ask this then. Andrea, maybe you can answer this. Who do you think conspiracy theories typically serve then?
Well, that's a great question. I think they serve a lot of different people. When it is something emergent like COVID, they're serving people, they're giving them comfort. They're giving them they're giving a way to process the information they're getting, because the thing we're kind of missing in all of this is that a lot of people don't necessarily understand how things like science work. Like, they have a general idea of how science works, but a lot of people, unfortunately, are working with like their third grade knowledge of science, right? What they learned maybe even high school that was, 20, 30, 40 years ago. So we're bad at communicating science. That is one of the things, and I will say that across the board. I think that's something we need to get better at. But also, like we were discussing earlier, conspiracy theory is so much more interesting, right? Science does not sound that exciting. We need to find ways to make science exciting again, right? Because I don't think people really understand everything that's happening, and I don't think that they don't understand that it changes, right? Like we were saying, you adapt to what you have with the current information that you have, and then sometimes that changes, and that's how science works. So I think that's part of it, is that we're kind of missing that part of it, and it really depends. Conspiracy theory can benefit the elite, it can benefit the government, it can benefit individuals. It's all in how it's used and if it's manipulated or not. This is the difference between malinformation and talking about misinformation, right? Or even disinformation. A lot of times what we spread things because we think it's right at the time, right? We get a piece of information, we think this might be helpful to our friends and family, we put it out on social media, and then we find out we're wrong, right? And there's no intent of harm there. I think that's where it really becomes a problem, is when there's intent to harm. Sometimes we do things with the best knowledge that we have at the time. There's no intent to harm there. But then there are other people, though, that are putting out propaganda, they're putting out misinformation with the intent to harm. And I think that's like where we get back to the Alex Jones stuff. That's where, we get back to those things, because that is intent to harm. That was not just intent to harm, but it was also intent to make money. That's what the whole motivating factor in that was, is he was getting clicks, he was getting likes and subscribes. So that's why he was doing it. So it wasn't, I don't think he actually believed a lot of the things he was saying. If you actually watch him talk about it, he has so many tells that show you that he actually doesn't believe the things he's saying. And I see that with a lot of people when they're spreading conspiracy theories. Someone that does a lot of interviewing, so many people, they like the sensation of being a part of the group, and they don't always necessarily believe every single thing that are in there. So their motivations can be really different. Sometimes they're motivated by just wanting to be a part of things, but other times people are motivated by profit and greed.
Can I just add one thing? It's not just the intent to harm, but sometimes people, it's in order to keep coherence to a certain belief system.
Yes.
So for example, it happened recently with the transgender science. There were people at the NIH that were doing this research with a preconceived notion. As a scientist, you're supposed to take in the evidence and you change your theory according to the evidence. But they they did a big study and found, I think it was with transgender, like they were saying if they didn't transition, it would cause much more, anxiety and depression. And they didn't find that. And they held back, it came out in the New York Times, they held back those results because they came up with this rationale, well, this is going to give more fodder to the people that don't want to do the transitioning. I mean, this is horrible, I think, like when you're holding back information and data because you don't want to change, you have a certain belief system, right, which is causing real harm to people, because one of the excuses or reasons to transition young children is that if they don't, they're going to get more anxiety and depression. You show it doesn't cause more anxiety and depression, you don't release that. So I think it's not just about intention to cause harm. You might actually, coincidentally cause harm, but also to stick with your particular belief system.
Absolutely.
So are they the results, sort of conspiracy theories, are they the result of a low trust environment where people have simply lost faith in institutions and media, or what is it?
It can be that, right? It can be that, especially when, again, if we question the people in power, say, for example, if you live in a state where you have authoritarian regime controlling your life, right? And you do not trust the government and you do not trust the media, say, for example, because you believe that the media provided you with information and serve as a government mouthpiece. So you start to kind of like, skeptical of everything, right? And that's where like conspiracy provided that comfort, right? That comfort, like, hey, you know what? The government is trying to control your life and the mainstream media is trying to influence how you see the world. And conspiracy theory kind of like matches with whatever that you believe already, right? And you know what? I'm right. Yeah, right? So when you see that conspiracy theory and that conspiracy feed into whatever that you believed in, you feel better, right? And what made it worse is that when you find other people that believe in that same ideology as well. And now you have a group of people, right? A group of people that share that same belief. And that's in group and out group, argument, right? So that's, I would say, that's one of the groups that kind of like benefit from conspiracy theory.
Yeah, and there's actually a lot of evidence showing that, especially groups that have been marginalized in the past, believe in conspiracy theory more.
Exactly.
And it's not because, they have more belief or any sort of, because a lot of this, especially in the U.S., ties into African-American communities.
Right.
But unfortunately, that also ties into the belief that African-American communities believe more in the supernatural. And, and that's been wildly discredited. It's that they still are experiencing conspiracy, right? They're still in the middle of these things. It's not just that these things happened in the past. So you can talk about something like the Tuskegee experiments, where a lot of African-American men were experimented on for decades and not treated for the condition that they had, and then passed it on to, there was a syphilis experiment, and then passed it on to their family, to their children. There was this horrible, horrible thing that happened. That's a past event that certainly, influences people right now, but they're also being influenced by the fact that there's still ongoing violence towards African-American communities, right? You don't have to have just it in the past. It's something that's currently happening. So it's not just that marginalized communities feel these things because of, more belief in these things because these events happened in the past. It's because they're continuing to happen right now.
Right.
And that's something that I learned during COVID, because I thought, this is going to be hit, especially a lot of the marginalized communities a lot harder during COVID, which it did. But it's because of the ongoing violence they're experiencing, not just the violence that they experienced in the past.
I want to add on to that as well. So when we talk about marginalized community, right, and a lot of time marginalized community, they often engage with conspiracy theory, right, to help them feel better about themselves. That's a one issue. And another issue is that vulnerable, what we call it, vulnerability. I hate that word.
Vulnerability.
Yeah.
That's a hard one.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
Right. also provide opportunity for people with interest, right? Political actors, interested parties to capitalize on that, right? And to kind of like use whatever belief that the conspiracy belief that this marginalized community has, right, to serve their goal. Right, we're talking about they can use this distrust towards government, right, to help opposition parties, say for example, right, to help us better understand, to gain more legitimacy, right, in terms in the political discourse, to influence public opinion. So a lot of time, not only that marginalized community are victim of whatever happened in the past, right, and they kind of resort to sometimes to conspiracy theory, but that belief also are being used by people who strategically, right, to gain something out of that. So I think it's something that we also need to be aware of.
I think it's almost like a dog whistle when there are groups that believe in
right.
conspiracy theories that are obviously so clearly, the antithesis to whatever the evidence is.
Right.
It's a signal that, hey, these people are gullible and that we can now influence them as well, and we can use them for our own, whatever advantage. But I do think it is a signpost to say, hey, hypnotists use this a lot. So hypnotists, when they test out an audience first to see who's going to be the most hypnotizable or basically like influential, being easily influenced. Sometimes they do this thing where they say, everyone close your eyes and imagine, there's a balloon tied to this hand and a huge rock tied to the other. And now you're lifting, the other one's going down, down, down. And they see whose arms are the most widely apart. That's the person that I'm going to be able to manipulate most. And they'll pull them onto the stage. But it's almost like a similar technique of like, who's going to be the most easily influenced? Right. And then we can use that, to our advantage.
The other thing with this too is like, I think we have to be careful too when we talk about like gullibility and that kind of stuff, because just because you have belief doesn't mean you're gullible. There's still people who, people have reason and logic. They actually do apply these things. Now, that's not to say that because of their experiences that maybe they're a little bit more influential or influenced by external factors or something like that. But like when we talk about people, we always talk about like other people's beliefs, but we don't talk about our own. And I think that's something we always have to remember in all of this is that we all have belief, right?
Exactly.
There's a folklorist named David Hufford, and he always said his saying was, what I know, but what you know, you only believe. And I always really like that because it really does talk about how, when we're talking about our own beliefs, we act as if they're all truth. But that's how everyone feels about their own beliefs.
What makes a good conspiracy, in your opinion?
Well, I think it has to have like that kernel of truth that has to be there. There has to be something that is already a part of the belief system, right? So something that sounds true or at least believable. We talk about a lot about believability when we talk about urban legends and those kind of narratives. So there has to be that little bit of something that's true, and it has to kind of tie into already existing narrative. So there has to be something there that feels real, even if it's maybe not literally believed. One folklorist said it typifies life in modern society. That's the kind of level of belief. So using that and finding that thing that kind of ties into something that's already believed, already sounds a little bit realistic, that's how you get a good conspiracy
So have
theory.
you ever found yourself believing in a conspiracy?
I'm trying to think. I'm very skeptical, so I think because I study them so much, I don't believe anything anymore. It's not without actually looking into it. But yes, I will say that I've been deeply disappointed by AI videos that I have briefly thought, that were, and I'm a big fan. I like animal videos. I'm one of those people. And man, when those raccoons were not jumping on that trampoline, I was so upset, right? I was just so upset about that. But I was already skeptical when I first watched it because I was like, oh, they're a little too uniform. They're a little, I don't know if I believe this already.
There's a personality trait. So there's 5 major personality traits. Ocean, it's open-mindedness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and eroticism. But open-mindedness is one that I think is really key here. So people who are open-minded are open to new ideas, trying new things, like, oh, I'll change my belief. So I think when I say gullible, that's a negative connotation. I mean like suggestibility. Certain people are more open or more easily influenced, and when people who are open-minded are willing to say, I'm willing to try anything and I'm willing to be skeptical, and a lot of people in the scientific community tend to be that way, not all of them, some have preconceived notions. The idea is, though, can I change my belief system with counter evidence? And there's a lot of people who are more able to do that as a personality trait versus not.
What about you? Have you ever found yourself believing in a conspiracy?
Not so much conspiracy. I am gullible, though. I have to say, I mean, it's so embarrassing to admit, but I think, and maybe this is talking highly of myself, but I'm a very truthful person. And so then I tend to believe other people are truthful and they're not. And so I'm not as skeptical as I should be. So I remember in the early days of the internet, I was a graduate student in the UK, and something popped on my computer screen. It was if you click here, you could win a vacation or whatever. I just was called my boyfriend at the time, oh my God, I could win this vacation. He's are you an idiot? So I am ridiculously gullible to those kinds of things. It's embarrassing to admit because I have too much, I trust people, maybe overly so, and I should be less trusting. But in terms of a conspiracy theory, there's some, I just don't think, my skepticism is with humanity. I don't think people are as organized and coordinated as we think they are to pull it off.
Right.
And so I'm always very skeptical, actually, of conspiracy theories. But on the other hand, I'm extremely gullible. So,
Alex, curious to hear your answer.
I've been trying to think of a good one, but I basically totally agree with Heather about that. I mean, I believe in confluence, not conspiracy, right? I mean, three can keep a secret if two of them are dead. I mean, really, people cannot keep their mouths shut. They want to brag. It's very difficult to get them to agree on anything. No, the conspiracy, big conspiracy theories are not, they're fun, but they're not real. I mean, so I guess I'm not doing a good job arguing in favor of them. But
who shot JFK?
Right. But here, who shot Charlie Kirk? Well, Tyler Robinson shot Charlie Kirk, and I think we know why he did it. But there's a woman on the right, Candace Owens, who, I mean, it's amazing that the right is arguing against this idea that this guy shot Charlie Kirk, probably to impress his trans girlfriend. I mean, that's a perfect right-wing story to tell. And yet for Candace, it's not enough. And she's gone down this incredible conspiracy rat hole, right? So who shoots political figures? Well, most of the time it's it's a lone gunman with a gun and a grudge. I mean, that's so I was a reporter at the New York Times for a long time, which they would like to pretend never happened, but it did happen. And I left because I started writing very successful spy novels. And I realized that the novels, I enjoyed them, and I enjoyed, doing well on them. But fundamentally, what I enjoyed about them the most was that as a reporter, you can never really own the world. People always lie to you. There's a famous comment from a New York Times reporter in the 1950s that political journalism is standing in marble corridors waiting for powerful people to lie to you. And as a novelist, you completely own your world. Your characters, they can lie to each other or they can even lie to themselves, but they can't lie to you. And that's why so many reporters at least take a stab at writing novels. But in the real world, you can't own everybody's thoughts, and nor would you want to, because you know what they were thinking about you, among other good reasons not to. And so you're stuck in a world of half-truth and supposition. And so, you want to put an organizing principle on there. And if you're not writing a novel, the best way to do it is a conspiracy. A conspiracy theory is sort of a novel for a non-novelist.
So what makes a good one, then? What makes a good one?
It's big. It is unfalsifiable. It can go on and on and on. And it has some answers to something that you want answers to. I mean, that's what makes a good novel, too, I think. I mean, not always, but... So yeah, long story short, I don't have a good conspiracy theory for you that I believed in, although I do believe my son may be a World Cup soccer player one day.
Okay. Nuri.
what makes a good conspiracy theory?
Yeah.
I want to go back to the
And have
point.
you ever believed in one?
Not that I can think of, but I fell victim to misinformation. Like, yeah, especially AI generated content, like especially at the beginning, right? When including that, I watched that video as well. And I watched it Rabbit as well. And this one grandma petting a bear, like on TikTok. I was like, oh, that's so cute. And apparently my students told me, like, that's fake. That's like AI. Oh, God, I'm teaching you a class on media information literacy. And I am that person fell victim to this AI generated content. So that happened. But nothing like on top of my head in terms of conspiracy theory specifically. But back to your question on what makes conspiracy theory, was that impactful? Was it impactful?
No, what makes it a sort of a good one? How outlandish does it need to be for it to capture people's imagination on a wide scale?
Okay, so we go back to that point where I was saying that human beings are social beings are emotional beings, and emotional beings, we like emotional stuff. So it has to have the emotional component to it, right? Something that taps your emotion, whatever that is, right? Anger, sadness, what we call a fear, right? So it has to have that emotional component to it. And also at the same time, like you said, unfalsifiable. Yes, right. It's hard for you to disprove that that's not real, right? So that it has to have that component. So emotion and the hardness or the difficulty for you to disprove it will make a good conspiracy theory. And also tap into your belief. Right?
I was just going to add to the AI thing, because I think it's an interesting point, is that I think, so I have children now, like 9 and 12, and I talked to them about this. Like we're growing up in the age of, actually we were in the mall the other day and they were giving out free chocolate bars. They were a Google bar. And I went up and my son's like, can I have this? And like, yeah, you just have to sign up for the Google AI and you can get this chocolate bar. And I was like, no, we're not going to do it. And I walked away. They gave the free one to my son anyway. But as we walked away, he's 9 years old and he said, this is the beginning of the end. And I said, what do you mean? And he goes, in all of the films, it shows like when AI takes over and people don't think for themselves, like he starts like, and anyway, I got into a discussion with them about how they're going to be living in this new world of AI. True. But what I think is really interesting, and it speaks to your students telling you this is fake, is that they, I hope, in an optimistic view, are going to start questioning everything. Right. They're not going to believe everything they see, and they're always going to, and then a group dynamic might emerge where they're like, okay, that's AI, this isn't, and everyone's going to question everything and come to a completely skeptical, whereas we're like naive to that, and we might be the ones who get more taken than the next generation.
So how should societies then address conspiracy? Just to piggyback off kind of what you're saying.
I think certain institutionalized things need to be put in place. And I think that it's something I call structured friction, and that it starts also like at universities. And, because universities have gone down these rabbit holes, whether it's being wokeism and all that, but they should be places where we encourage debate like this. Right. We encourage people with different views interacting. Right. And we reward that. We reward people, taking in alternative views. We reward, so even just like with the peer review process and I think the scientific method is great because it's the best thing we have so far to get away from our own personal biases. We have peers reviewing it. We try to be as objective as we can. We need to get away from our own subjectivity, from the human emotion part of it. Right. At least when it comes to conspiracy theory, so we can get to facts. So we need to put things into place that question everything, that question our conclusions, and encourage active dialogue and debate early on for children, that becomes a way of thinking.
So I don't think there's much anyone can do to solve this problem. And I guess I probably think it's less of a problem than everyone else at the table. But Andrew, you probably know this history better than I do, but it strikes me, so you look at these cults, millennial cults, and when the big leader is wrong the first time, people tend to double down, and maybe he gets one more shot. But after you've predicted the end of the world twice and the world doesn't end, people tend to walk away, right? I mean, so nothing is unfalsifiable forever. right? At some points, people will be skeptical, right?
I hope so. I think, there's always going to be, of course, people who are diehard believers. They're never going to give it up. But I do think at some point, everyone has a breaking point, right? Everybody does have a point where they start to see, like, this is falling apart. This is not working anymore. But like one of the things I think that we really need to incorporate in all of this is storytelling, right? Because the stories are the most convincing things. The facts, as we were talking about, are not interesting, right? So we need to turn the facts into stories. So if we can figure out a way to narratize, I guess, to narrate in some way science, if we can figure out a way to narrate media literacy, how do we turn that into something that people want to hear? And I think it starts with, like, have you ever accidentally believed in a conspiracy theory, right? Like, starting with that, saying, hey, let's all find common ground and talk about that. I think that's part of the way to do it. And I think we really need to work with people who are in conspiracy theories. And this is individual work, right? This is not something that you can do, kind of across the board blanket kind of stuff. We need to talk to our family members, even though we might not want to, about their conspiracy theories and talk to them about it, and start to help them unravel that web that they're in, because all of our beliefs are interconnected, right? You can't just like pull one belief out. They're connected to other beliefs. So we have to start like getting them to question too. So that questioning is definitely a big part of it. But also getting them to say, like this has happened to me too. I almost did this, or I almost fell
So we
into
may be
this.
the absolute wrong people to be having this conversation. I'm not joking, because none of us could come up with a single conspiracy that we actually believed in. I mean, and as you were saying, it stops working for them, and I was realizing that is the language of recovery. It actually is. It's like suddenly my life, recovery is usually drugs, but it can be any real difficult addiction, right? Like your life stops working in a very meaningful way. And I mean, it's almost like maybe there do need to be 12-step groups for people who are in this, who can talk about like how it is that they grew to believe and
But
how
there
it is that they got
there's
out of it.
the cults, transition, like QAnon, and it's like a cult, right? And you have to, and the more Scientology. I mean, there's things that are where the belief systems are so out there that it's almost like a sign of group affiliation. If you're willing to take this step and continue to believe this crazy thing, you must really be part of our group. It's like initiation to like fraternities and sororities. You have to do crazy things. So the higher the initiation cost, the more group affiliation. And so the more radical the belief you have to say you adhere to, the more it shows how much you are affiliated with this group. And those are things that you have to work psychologically to detransition. And there are ways, like when people come out of cults. But I disagree that all conspiracy theories are eventually gonna, or maybe, I bring it back to religions. Like, I once met with all these religious leaders, and we had this debate and discussion about, like, if we discovered the neural basis of consciousness, what does that mean for the idea of a soul? And they basically said, it doesn't matter what you discover in science. The soul is outside of the realm of proving it positive. It's unfalsifiable.
Heather, hang on for a second. Just to take you back to the point you were making about QAnon, for those that may not be familiar with QAnon, can you elaborate on it and explain it?
Yeah, you could probably explain it better.
Someone explain it to our international audience.
It is a group of people who were on the right in the U.S. who had radical conspiracy theories and beliefs. I don't know what they all were. I think one of them was Pizzagate. Like, there was some Democratic underground underneath, like in the basement of a pizza place in D.C., which didn't even have a basement, that they were having like a child pedophilia ring. I don't know the rest of their beliefs, but they were all pretty out there. But they all group affiliated with the right wing, and that there was a huge like left wing conspiracy and pedophilia ring, and then it emerged and morphed into a lot of other beliefs. But it was pretty out there, and these people fervently believed this.
Yeah, there's some people you're not going to be able to reach. That's just part of this.
There is, there is this other thing that has happened, and we may all be sort of too old to talk about it, where, I think it is hard to know sometimes what people are believing and what they are pretending to believe to sort of get a reaction from the establishment. And that makes it even harder, right? Because it's all a joke until the minute I pull out a gun and start shooting, and then it's not a joke anymore, right? And so people have this, and yes, I think it is more it leans a little bit on the right, but there's some of this on the left with Antifa as well. This notion of I'm just testing things out. I'm just playing with language. None of it really means anything. It's all sort of nihilistic, and that is very dangerous too, right? Because that's almost past conspiracy, right? Like there is no conspiracy. Nothing means anything. All language is just a chance to, own the libs or upset the right, whatever it may be. And so I don't have a solution to that either. But I think like that is, again, that's almost a step beyond what we're talking about. But we do need to discuss it at least a little bit.
But I think that, trying to change people at the individual level is very hard. But that's why my solution is kind of like we need systemic change. We need to like have a society that believes in, debate and discussion and evidence and openness to changing ideas. We need to elevate people's standard of living. Like I think a lot of it has to do with this, being marginalized, the uncertainty for even just getting basic resources, and the vulnerability that propagates these belief systems. So I'm thinking more on a systemic level. I think changing an individual, try as you may, it could work, it might not, but it's not going to make it be a solution to the overarching problem.
So do you think we can truly change minds once an idea has taken off or not?
I do. I think we can, but there's a series of steps. Maybe there should be a manual of but you have to first of all find common ground. You have to connect with people at a certain level and start from there and find out what they care about and why they're believing in these things, and then kind of slowly work your way from there. I remember once I found myself in a car with a bunch of senators. It was a very interesting, long story, but I found out they only get 15 minutes to meet with like a scientist, let's say, or an expert before making a policy decision. I was surprised to hear that. So now I had this hour-long car ride with these Republican senators, and I was along with Bill Nye the Science Guy. It was a very crazy story. But we were trying to find, what do they care about in terms of science? And one of them said, the opioid epidemic is really important to me. So then I started talking about the importance of funding, neuroscience research for addiction. Like that was the common ground I found to, open that up. Or another one had a particle accelerator in his state. And, that became but find the common thread and then work from there.
Is it harder now, though? My apologies. Is it harder now, or is it more challenging now than it was, let's say, 100 years ago?
I think yes, because of social media and because of the amplification and group affiliation. I think, we were in tribes at one point, and a lot of these mechanisms evolved in that situation. But now it's like we call it super normal stimuli. Like it's things that activate our brain multiplied. And so it is harder now because you're not just affiliated with a small tribal group. You're affiliated with what feels like millions of people, which is actually no one in a sense, because it's just you sitting in your room, clicking on the Twitter, whatever. But it subjectively, it feels like, we're more strongly affiliated with more people. But really, when it comes down to it, our actual interactions are still in these small communities.
Yeah, I was just going to say, it's interesting because you're talking about policy and then you started talking about individuals, right? So I think it is both. I think we can put policy into place, but we do still have to work with individuals. And, and I think because everyone's belief system is so complicated, that's why we need to figure out what are people's real fears, what are their real concerns, what's actually really going on in their head, and try to figure that out and untangle it. One of my favorite examples of some of the research I did during COVID was I was interviewing a nurse about, giving out COVID vaccines. And she told me this story about how she had someone come in. He did not want to get vaccinated for COVID, but he had to for work. And he was worried about microchips. That was his concern. Right. And so she said, I probably shouldn't have done this. And she was kind of apologetic to me. And she said, I probably shouldn't have done this, but I just showed him the bottle. And I said, do you see right here where it says do not shake? And he's like, yeah. And she says, well, I get like 3 or 4 doses out of each of these bottles. So how would I distribute the microchips evenly if I can't shake it? And he said, oh, I never thought about that. And she's like, oh, I shouldn't have said that. I'm like, no, that's exactly what you should have said. Like, that's actually the perfect example of working with somebody where they are, right? If they believe that there are microchips in here, well, let me take this from your perspective. Like, let me show you how this works. And that really did have an impact on him. He actually was like, that I never thought about that. And it's like, and he probably went home and thought about it some more. And hopefully, maybe it opened up his mind a little bit more. So I think we do have to have those like sort of personal interventions, if you will, if we're going back to the addiction narrative again. We need to talk about that with people and sit down and even if we don't want to do it, because I know we all have a conspiracy theorist in our family, I'm sure. And there's sometimes we don't want to have that conversation over, a holiday dinner or anything like that.
Dinner.
Yeah, exactly. But we
Right.
still have to do it, right? We still have to be there, and we still have to say, not only let's talk about that. Let's question it from your point of view, but let them know that they're welcome back, right? That our community is open. We're not going to, I told you so, we're going to say, you know what, come back. You're allowed, keep coming to dinner, right? Let's get together again next week. But also get allies too around you, because it can't just come from one person. It has to come from other sources. Get them outside of that loop. And I mean, there are things you can do too that are, I don't know. I think they're morally questionable. I've had people tell me that they've blocked Fox News on their parents' TV so that they can't access it. Things like that. I'm like, I don't know if I agree with that. But there are things that we can do where we do them individually, and hopefully that they can lead to policy. They can lead to, hey, this is how you talk to someone. Let's come up with a strategy. Let's sit down together as a group of different people doing different types of research and say, what can we work on together? I would love to see somebody's brain when they're telling a story, and when they hear a conspiracy theory, I'd like to see what parts light up, what's happening there. That would be amazing information to get and to work with somebody on that, where you can all kind of work together and see what you come up with as a group. But unfortunately, that's not the kind of things that get funding, right?
There are studies, but I will say one thing. There is,
Yeah.
I think there's also, we need to change people's sticking so coherently to ideologies and then having to believe everything within that ideology. I'm not a particular political affiliation. I believe believe in some policies on the left. I believe in some policies on the right. I think there's some terrible policies on the left and terrible policies on the right. So I think there could be both, and that the fact that we have to choose a side and then believe everything within that system, I think is very flawed. I had another point I was going to make, but I forgot. But I think that the part of the issue is not just changing an individual. You have to do that as well, but it's changing this idea that you have to believe everything within a particular ideology as a whole, and you can't break up the pieces. And
I want to add on to that as well.
Sure.
I believe in there's no one solution fits all. We're talking about individual level. We're also talking about the policy level. So I had a opportunity to speak with a son of QAnon believers, a conspiracy believer. So one of the things that he mentioned as I had this conversation with him is that it is important for us to see these believers, right, as human beings, right? So, human beings, and try to understand why exactly that they believe in that conspiracy theory. And then when you understand that and you do not see them as the other and you see them as a fellow human being, then you can understand why they are why they understand why they believe in that story, that theory, right? And then you can coming in, like you said, try to make them see better what exactly the issue is about, right? So humanizing conspiracy theory believer would be one of the best ways. And secondly, again, I believe that we need to make social media more accountable. And how do we do that? It's to make to kind of have a more conversation about it, and what we call it, to call them out more, right? So we're saying that, hey, I like the fact that Meta now is under public scrutiny due to another research that they did that they tried to bury, and kind of we happen to see it in the media now. So we're trying to kind of make social media more accountable so they can do better, right? It's not about punishing them. It's about making them understand that they have such a huge role in society, right? So more accountable. How can we make them more accountable? Through policy. And that policy has to come from either a government or what we call it, multi-national, what we call it, corporations. We're talking about EU, we're talking about ASEAN, right? So we can form a policy, and that policy, again, I mentioned this before, shouldn't be controlled and formed by only one identity, one agency. It should be included scientists like you, scholars like you, journalists like you, so that it's more cohesive and more holistic. It's not going to be as biased. wrong, right? If one person does it, right? So that's another. And I also a believer of media information literacy, where I teach at Oklahoma State. So I'm like the only professor that teach that class, media information literacy. It was recently introduced, like 2 years, and I could see how my student engaged with the content. And at the end of the semester, they will be writing like, this class helped me understand that, media and information really affect society. So we need to kind of like introduce this kind of curriculum, but we do not do it very consistently across institutions. Like in Malaysia, where I'm from originally, we do not have that in our school curriculum. It's almost like afterthoughts, right? It's not as important, right? But in reality, this information problems that we have, information disorders, really shape our society. What do we do about it, right? Systemically, we do not have anything that we put in place, right?
I remembered the thing I was going to say before, and I want to say it before I forget. That you were talking about the neuroscience. There have been studies which look at the brains of people with different political beliefs, and was interesting. One finding was that people who are more conservative in their political ideology have greater insula activation, which is the part of the brain that has to do with disgust, like I talked about before. So otherness, right? It's scary. It feels dangerous in that sense. They feel more disgusted by the other, which is contamination fear, ultimately, what that comes down
it's
to.
the left that has pushed cancel culture for the last 15 years.
Well, I think there's cancel culture on both sides. I mean, Jimmy Kimmel just got canceled
for 4 days.
There's a lot of cancellation happening and blocking of free speech from the right now as well. I think it comes from both sides.
Do not like.
The problem is that the greatest defenders of free speech have to defend speech that they don't like. So when it happens on the left, they have to be prepared that it's going to happen, and people are going to be suppressed from the right when they're in power. I think it does happen on both sides, and is happening on both sides. And although the Trump administration came in with this, we're going to promote free speech and it's all great, it's the opposite. So I think it's problematic on both sides. But it's just interesting, this finding that there is this, that it's not to put any kind of valence on it. It's just to say that certain people who have conservative beliefs might have slightly different kinds of brains there, and the same thing with people on the left. So we're not talking about humans as a whole. Everybody is, each individual brain is like a thumbprint, and they're all slightly different, and we're all really seeing the world through a very different lens and experiencing our fears differently, right? So someone who's more conservative might feel, fear contamination. Someone on the left might fear, suppressing of individuality and, whatever, their own creativity, right? And that's their personal fear. And so we just have to be cognizant of the sort of brain science behind it all, and that not everybody's the same.
Alex, ultimately, who do you think bears the responsibility for spreading conspiracy theories, and should they even be stopped?
No one and everyone, and no, they shouldn't be stopped.
They shouldn't be stopped.
No, there's no way to stop them. I mean, this idea that, we want the companies to have more power, I don't agree with. I was the brunt, or I literally faced this censorship myself. I was removed from Twitter when it was Twitter in 2021 for saying accurate stuff about the mRNA vaccines. The tweet that got me banned said, it doesn't stop infection or transmission, which I don't think is open to question at this point. I don't think even the biggest mRNA vaccine defender would call that a conspiracy theory. I'm a very firm believer in the First Amendment, and I don't think that the government of the United States, which is where I'm from, should be leaning on social media companies to censor. I think it's just sort of all our responsibility to try to debate rationally, try to, be loud when we need to be. That's what it was like before social media. That's what it's like on social media. The companies do have a lot of power because they can put their thumbs on the scale of what people see with algorithms. There's a law called broadly known as Section 230 in the United States, that gives them almost infinite ability to do that without facing any legal consequence. I think that is a problem. But but if the solution to that problem involves more government interference, I don't favor that. So ultimately, I guess I'm still hopeful on some level that, we all yell and scream and the truth does come out. And yes, there are going to be people you can't reach. There are going to be people who believe that we are all lizard people or whatever it might be. But, there aren't going to be enough of those people to set public policy, I certainly hope.
Okay, look, since you mentioned the word truth, let me ask you this, and I'd like everyone to answer the same question as well. What conspiracy theory currently out there do you think is going to eventually be proven to be true?
Well, beyond the lab leak theory, I think it's possible that the Chinese have a strategy to send opioids and other drugs of abuse to the United States. That it's sort of a long-term, that they remember the Opium War very well. I'm not saying that that's definitely true, but it wouldn't shock me if in 5 or 10 years we have hard evidence of that.
Okay. Andrea, do you want to go for it?
That's a tough one. I think we're definitely going to find out that I think the Epstein files is going to probably be the biggest thing that comes out. I think when we actually hopefully get more information about that, I think there might be some things in there that are maybe not going to surprise people, but then we'll have maybe more evidence of it. But we'll see. I honestly, that one I'm not really sure about, to be honest.
Mm-hmm. I think the Russian interference in the election is going to be true. I think that, and again, this is conspiratorial, so I'm open to evidence either way, but I think that Trump has an interesting relationship with Putin and Russia, and there might be some...
Has this not been investigated to smithereens?
To
almost literal smithereens?
I think that there is truth to the Russian interference in their election, for sure. That's going to come out more and more. The other is that, I think that there's manipulation from China and other nations via social media, things like TikTok, to influence Americans in a negative way. So, things that they don't allow in their own country, but that are allowed here. And so it's an information warfare, let's say. I think those will probably bear out.
I definitely go with that second one, too.
You would? Okay. We agree. See? Common ground.
For me, I just want to start off I do not equate conspiracy theories with real conspiracy, because I really want to focus on the evidence to it. But to go to your question, is there any potential real conspiracy that I believe in? Is that where I'm from, Malaysia and Southeast Asian regions, we are off middle nations. We're not big nations. We're developing regions. So one of the potentially real conspiracy is that our region are being used as a battleground for greater powers, China, the U.S. And,
so is that even a conspiracy?
Yeah, right. Where we're from, right? Because people are seeing a lot of content from China, Chinese journalists speaking in our local language, right? And people question: is it really cultural appreciation, or is it one of the ways for them to influence locals to look at them more positively than we look at the U.S., right? We do not have U.S. journalists speaking in local language in my country, but we do have Chinese journalists speaking Malay language to speak. Hey, I am a Chinese journalist and I can speak Malay, right? So people see them as positive, figures, yeah, and more preference towards that. But the issue is there's also conversation on ground. We're saying that that's one of the ways for the Chinese government to influence local, but there's no there's a lot of investigation on that right now, right? There's a lot of investigation on that right now, be it in Malaysia, be it in other countries in the region. So that is one of the things that I feel that can be a real conspiracy once we have strong evidence.
I think it's very interesting that three of the four of us, put out theories that relate to China in some way. And the fourth, obviously, the Epstein file. But I don't think. I think this is an example of conspiracy theories, offering a glimpse into reality, right? Which is that China is fast become the second most powerful, if not the most powerful country in the world, that it dominates a lot of Asia and Asian politics, and the rest of the world has to adapt to it. And we're all trying to figure out what that means, right? I mean, aside from AI, it's probably the biggest question of the last 10 years at least. And so, yes, we're sort of we're not throwing out crazy theories here, but we're throwing out theories that point to something real.
We'll have to ask the Chinese for their reaction to this.
That's right.
Thank you so much. Alex, thank you so much. Nuryanti, thanks.
Thank you so much.
Andrea and
Irene.
Heather, great to have you with us. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Well, if you enjoyed this conversation and you want to see more, you can subscribe to the Doha Debates YouTube channel so you don't miss out on any future episodes. Thanks for watching.